welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who will go in first and keep the main defense force busy while I slip in.
Tim Longo.
I guess you're zero in this. So there's a cutscene that happens when you go to do the final assault on Sigma's deal.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. So it's about that. Not that I made it all the way through to the end of Sigma's Fortress. And a little, peek behind the production curtain here. We are recording on Friday because Tim's going to be on the road a little bit next week, and we just are not going to have more time. So now's the time to do it.
Yeah. So is Zero... So, I mean, because I didn't get even as far as you did, and for both of us, I think we're just not the Mega Man players we ever were or used to be. Or whatever.
I never was.
Yeah.
I'm not the Mega Man player I ever could have been, I suppose. But
right.
But what is a lot? I mean,
so what is
also
Zero's
like
role?
The way we're playing. So the first new sort of boss encounter in the fortress that you're assaulting at the end because of the deep lore is somebody in one of those mech suits, and you come in there and you basically have a scene like the beginning of the game where you fight something that you can't win, and it beats you up and it beats you down until you're a certain percentage of your health, and then or a certain level of health, and then Zero, who's been in a cage this whole time, breaks free and takes out the dude's mech suit. And then you regain your power, like it fills up your health bar, and the enemy is like, oh, what? Well, even if you do get your energy back, I'll still beat you or whatever, and then you lay the beat down. But in that explosion, Zero is killed.
Oh,
and you have a little cutscene afterwards of you going up to Zero and Zero saying, "Oh, you were the strongest one after all," or words to that effect, and then Zero kind of fades out. So, yep,
wow,
it's the whole thing. It's a real tearjerker.
Yeah, a turn in the story. I'm really that's bold move. Okay, so it's not like you fight. What I was hoping would happen, which I don't know, I'm sure Zero's not dead, of course, but what I was hoping...
Well, there is a Mega Man Zero series, as you pointed out, so I presume...
It could be prequel, though,
Could be.
This could be it. This could be it.
I mean, they are robots. One presumes you can build another one.
That's fair. Good point. Yeah, I just sort of assumed because they're setting, they set him up pretty early or right away that there'd be sort of a fight where he's there fighting with you or something, and I guess that's sort of what you described, but like I would be cool for you to fight with him against Sigma at the end. So yeah, maybe we'll watch that on YouTube later and see what happens. But yeah, okay, well. Yeah, so I did get further than I did before. So I got through a few bosses and stuff, but I didn't get to Sigmas, and I attempted a few more, but just time. I mean, it's just the run based sort of like not perfection based, but just really needing to memorize and get the patterns, and it's not too unlike Dark Souls, I guess, in some ways. It's just time consuming. So so
it eats a lot of time. I mean, what I ended up doing a lot of, this time, this week especially, was stopping at points in the level and going back and re-triggering enemies to get the drops, to get my health back up.
Yeah.
And that's just not all that fun. I mean, it's very tedious.
Yeah.
And I was doing it just so that I could get to the end boss. And so it's kind of it's kind of a crutch of a design, right? I mean, it's well, they can always go back, and it's like, yeah, but is it fun to go back? Like, I mean, I'm literally in the same screen and a half, right? I'm moving a little bit to the right and coming back to the left because I know this thing's going to come back and it might drop, health. It might drop health, is the worst part of it, because a lot of times it doesn't. It'll drop like, your secondary energy, secondary weapon energy or whatever, the alternate weapons energy, or very rarely it might drop a extra life, very rarely, and not all enemies do. Maybe all enemies can, but I haven't seen all enemies do it, certainly. Some enemies seem to never drop anything, so it's
they do seem to have loot,
weird stuff like that.
Yeah, they do seem to have some sort of loot table sort of ratio going on there, which isn't which is I'm trying to think of, so is that really the case in some of the others we've talked about? Castlevania or Metroid. Do they? Is it random?
They do. Castlevania Symphony of the Night drops random health ups and things like that.
I can remember. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of grinding. I think that, to your point on going backwards, which is a good topic. I mean, it's just a quick topic, at least. The only time, and this is where I I think we're going to never stop talking about Dark Souls now, because we've played it and you've played so much, etc. But, and I think when it comes to one of the points of the podcast, we're trying to look at the legacy of these games, and you see some of those vague connections here, but the core loops, the core fun of the game has to be fun, like purely fun on its own to be okay replaying and going back to grind. And I would say in Dark Souls case that is true. Like even a minion can be a challenge and fun, and you feel good.
I see new things all the time in enemies that I've played against dozens of times, and I'll be like, oh, I didn't know that would happen. Like, for some quirk of the geometry, like I retreated and, there was some place where something weird happened with the geometry, or just like how far things will kite you and like when they'll stop, or when they'll kite to you rather, so there's all these kind of like weird things that happen just from repeated play. You expose more and more, and you're like, I didn't even know, like there's these stone gargoyles, and there's like one, and I probably killed this one gargoyle 50 times at least, and then one time he jumped backwards, and I was like, what? Like, I didn't know you jumped backwards. I know they can all do the things that I can do, but they don't always. And it feels it's so remarkable to be like, I think I've seen everything you can do, and then suddenly like, oh, you could do that, like, or discovering that something you didn't realize had a soft spot, a crit spot, discovering it and it being not what you expected. It's not just get behind it and stab it, it's something else. And I was thinking in particular because I know you fought a creature that's hard to do that to, and it's because it's not the typical backstab. It's something else, and it was something I never got good at consistently. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. They have a critical damage thing, but it's not when they do that, or it's not just getting behind them. So it's and that is really interesting. And here, you just get better at doing the tiny little section of hallway, but you might not see that enemy again, maybe ever, that type, that's one other thing. And that'd be my takeaways. Actually, I think that's a strength and a weakness. I do think that the variety of the enemies is really pretty cool and interesting. It does mean you're always learning something new or figuring out something. And to switch to another topic, you're having this trial and error that, that may not go well for you. Like, I didn't know this thing was going to do that. This thing rains down missiles from the sky. It only shoots them in pairs, so it's like shoot, and then that's your chance to move. And like picking up on those patterns, you're going to probably die once or twice before you realize, or, take a lot of damage or whatever, and maybe make this run not useful, many times. granted, I did set up my SNES and made it a little easier to deal with those things, so that the fatal trial and error for me was often not fatal in that I had the rewind superpower, but in general, I mean, it was designed without that in mind. In general, they're kind of pushing those things on you, and as you pointed out in pre-show, it's a very arcade mentality that still gripped, game design, I think, at this period.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked about this before, but it is that quarters have migrated to playtime or something. It's like, it's not how many quarters you spend, it's how many minutes you spend in the game, and so how do we extend that out in artificial ways? Yeah. So the trial and error for me, I mean, you mentioned some of the specific sort of locations and things, and I think some of the level design itself, is clearly pushing. There's a couple cliff areas, well, actually in quite a few places where it's just you're jumping. There's no way you could know what you're just jumping down essentially. And I mean, you could, but it's like they're really very much about. Yeah, no, actually, there's a couple where there's no way you could know. You just have to try it. And memorize it, and then if you choose wrong, you could potentially die. So yeah, it's just unfair. It's too bad, because I would have thought they would have learned some of those lessons in Mega Man 1 through 6.
Right.
But maybe that's just I don't know, maybe that's just now an accepted trope of this series. But anyway.
Or really, maybe it's what we don't look up things like reviews or anything like that, but maybe it's what people wanted was like that. This is the challenging one where you have to, none of the levels are very long, but you have to learn them, right? And you really have to spend time on them. And if you want to get the most out of the game, you really need to dive in. I mean, there's lots of secrets to find, or at least identify, right? So and that definitely makes the end of the game easier. So there's definitely, because I found a couple heart upgrades, and that was nice to have additional health going into some of the, the couple battles I made it into in the fortress. But this sort of design has not really held up. It's definitely a thing that we had moved away from. Even, I mean, I think it probably dragged a little into the PS2 era. I mean, lives were still a thing, right? And that's, I mean, sure, there's games that still have them out there or whatever. It's not, no design idea is truly dead ever, but, always somebody might find some interesting thing to do with it. But it's also was a changing thing, as, lives being, pay this for this many lives to have this artificial limitation that, stopped making sense once we had the thing in our house. But I don't know. I mean, I don't know what I don't remember well enough, because I didn't have a console, like what the cultural zeitgeist was around these vis-a-vis arcades. Like, was it meant to just feel like you had an arcade in your house? In which case, I guess it's, you don't have to feed quarters into it. You had to, spend, lots of quarters to get it in your house, and lots more quarters on each game. But, I don't know.
I remember that. Well, I don't remember specific like ads or something like that, but I do, at least from a consumer's perspective, remember that vividly being a thing. So for the 2600 for me, for the NES, and then I migrated from the NES to the Genesis, and I didn't have a Super Nintendo. But for each of them, like for instance, whenever one of the popular arcade fighting games came out on any of the 16-bit platforms, right? Part of the whole like thing about it was no quarters. It was like, I can play as much as I want. I can practice. I can, it's like that was like part of the feel and the excitement. And I will say marketing again, though, even though I can't remember the ads per se, but the emotional feeling as a consumer of that freedom was definitely a thing. But it's not like they changed the way the design worked because it now didn't require quarters. You just could keep playing. And those are a little bit different because fights are obviously a short number of minutes long, and so it's a different than playing a level. I remember too, going back to the 2600, as just a small anecdote, when Pac-Man finally came out on the 2600, which was a terrible port. You may remember it.
Yeah, I do.
Terrible port, so disappointing, but there still was that feeling of I'm playing Pac-Man in my house, and it's like I could play forever if I want. And then that's when you realize you don't want to play Pac-Man forever, and there's something about
unless
it being in the arcade.
You're Billy Mitchell or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there are those who do. I'm not trying to discount it, but I mean, there's something about the mixture, the recipe of it being in the arcade that gave it the allure that it had. And when you take that away, you've actually lost the crust of the pizza or something, because it's like, oh
yeah. I mean, arcades were a social experience, right? I mean, you were there not only in the actual pure physical act of it, right? And you were in a shared space, but also in the machines themselves, because the high score table was there, and like you were you were seeing people had multiple entries, and you're like, can I get on that table? And that was a whole big part of it. And none of that really makes any sense at home. And then you also lose the social aspect, because, of course, this was also the time, that they were shifting marketing, the NES and the SNES era, to, young boys, right? I mean, to boys, right? 12 to 19 or whatever. And so there was a definite shift in, what that was meant to be about. And I think that that's also a thing. Like, I mean, they were trying to keep it competitive in some ways, because that's what appeals to boys, I think, broadly speaking, or at least that was the marketing thinking. And so I think that's why you probably have the continuation of arcade style, because they have that sort of competitive feel in them, and it'll design a lot of the games by their very nature. So I don't know. I think that there's some sort of bleed that happens there because of the marketing shift. It became less and less like family thing. I mean, I think ads still had some family stuff, in the Atari era, and I think it started being less and less. And certainly it's reflected in the games, I think.
Yeah. Well, it's like the ultimate there is a tiny bit of QTE skill to it. The ultimate trial and error experience, in my opinion, was Dragon's Lair and Space Ace, in the arcade. It's just like, it's like left or right. Where do I have to press? Oh, died. Okay. It's memorization, trial and error, death over and over. Yeah. So I mean, I guess, I was just bummed on that subtopic, because it felt like the SNES was a bit of a sea change for, like home consoles. Well, I mean, I guess Nintendo's games are really the better examples most of the time, right? But Castlevania that was PlayStation 1, but although, now that I think about it, Castlevania 4 was pretty of this mentality.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So really, but Symphony of the Night, jeez, what a good game. I still think about that game.
I know. It's a real leap forward. I mean, that was, whenever that castle turned over. Yeah. I mean, I think that's when things started to change as far as that. I mean, and it took a while. I mean, I think we still had, like I said, games with lives and stuff into the PS2 era, but that is, the PS1 is when things started to change, and kind of push forward. They started saying, well, do we really need this? Right. And you started seeing that we didn't really need it anymore.
It was really,
the one I keep hearing is that level loading is going to be a thing of the past. And yet we still,
I just read an article. Yeah. It was Polygon maybe or somewhere. Yeah. Recently, where they're just like, level loading is the battleground of the future. It's like, oh my gosh, can we stop talking about level loading? It's not going to happen. We're always going to find ways to fill it. I'm telling you.
Yep.
We're really good.
Yes, we are. We are. We just make more. We just make more stuff to put in there.
Yeah. But I mean, you're right that I think, though we're maybe a little bit off track, I do feel like the PlayStation 1 was one of, maybe it was because, at least speaking from my own personal perspective, because it was Sony and it was so weird that Sony was coming out with a console that it was the first one that I remember thinking of it as, because I was playing PC games the whole time, really.
Sure.
But that was the first one where I was thinking, I'd go into a Circuit City or or a Fry's or something, and you see a PlayStation 1 and you're like, that is a home entertainment system. That's got a CD in it. It's a Sony product. It's displayed with the big TVs, and it's like, I don't want to see this 16-bit stuff, or whatever. And so it's like, that's for kids. And though they're all, they all were for both, but yeah, I mean, I we've talked about this probably in various series, but yeah, that's a good point. And I think that was really a bit of a migration toward a different design mentality that was left behind. Cause again, Symphony of the Night, kind of did away with this stuff, for the most part.
I think game overs lasted a long time, and there's still games with game overs, but
you died.
But mostly not, Yeah, you died. Yes, I mean sometimes it's kind of wry in a way. It's it's not a huge speed bump really. But
it's more of an emotion than a real problem.
For sure. Let's talk about a couple things. There are a couple other things that you had mentioned in pre-show and that it's just a lot of quick topics at this point. One was that you can swap the weapons quickly. I did not notice nor try it. Now I'm like, is that in the manual? Now I'm wondering if that literally is an improvement for the Legacy Collection. So I'm going to look that up while you talk.
Yeah, it might have been, but and I actually didn't read the manual for the Legacy Collection, and then found it accidentally later than I would like. But I mean, one of the whole things about Mega Man is obviously the weapons swapping, right, and damage types and all of that stuff. And so the ability to on the fly swap those, basically cycle through your weapons using the bumpers, is pretty big game changer even for mid-level stuff, because there's times even when you're fighting regular enemies, or you want to do something like the shotgun's a good example, because the ice shotgun, because it ricochets backwards and stuff, and you just want to quickly pop to that, shoot a couple things that are out of reach, and inevitably they'll hit it, and because it kind of sprays and bounces and stuff. And so yeah, I mean, that's having come off of Mega Man 2, which we just played, it's like night and day when it comes to usability for a game that is built around that kind of very concept,
and that one was especially tedious because it was paged, so it's like you have to go to the next page besides, and you're looking around for the thing, and it's just letters, which was I'm sure a memory constraint or glyph constraint or something, but so they only had a limited, and that might also been why they had to page it. Like I don't know what kind of space they had, but it was weird.
You can see them problem solving that, where they're like, oh no, we can't put them all on one page. What are we going to do? We don't have the memory for that many letters.
So, or we can't display them all. It could have been that too, is that to actually show it might have been too much. I don't know. It's super weird. It was in the game. I just didn't notice, and it's not taught. So, well, I mean, with the SNES, that was one of the innovations of that controller was shoulder buttons. So you can see them designing to it. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I just never occurred to me to try. Yeah. The other thing too is I don't necessarily read the icons, so it's like if I switched, I might look at it and go, okay, I don't know what that is. Like, some of them, yes, like the homing torpedoes, which when they're introduced are called horming torpedoes. Just want to localization. The horming torpedo. Well, the and then they're right in it's like homing T, I think, in the pause menu. But yeah, you that one I would recognize, and there's probably a couple others that I would, but like the rolling shield, I had that today, and I looked at the icon, and it's just a blue circle. Basically, there's a little bit of detail inside it, but it's like it's very abstract. So I don't know that that's a huge usability win from I guess once you know them really well.
It's more memorization, probably.
Yeah.
Right?
But also as you're adding them, it's like, you know, you've got to hit it, you know, multiple times. And of course the order is changing. You might have new ones in the way, right? You know, to get to the one you want to get to. It's
not perfect, but it is better than going to a paging menu and pausing and having to blip. Yeah. But yeah, for sure. If only they had a radial menu, they could have.
Yeah, I don't know if that would have flown in.
No, I'm kidding. That's an innovation that comes with an analog stick down the road.
Yeah, so. You definitely need that. Cool. And then you had also said there were some useful updates, you know, as far as the UI goes, and the more information you get with the rewards, you know, as you get a new weapon, you're actually shown using it and things like that. Which are cool.
Yeah, and also so with specifically beating a boss, the sequence, which, you know, we didn't play from 2 all the way through the series to X, so, you know, we don't know if some of the stuff was kind of creeping in. I mean, talk about an iterative franchise. Like, they got a lot of swings at bat on this thing. But let's, you know, as far as our jump from 2 to X being so big, the boss selection screen I thought was very cool, right? Because you had those different augmenting, those augmenters right on each of the 4 corners that allowed you to, or at least 3 of the 4, I think, that you could switch it into another mode and then go to the boss and you get extra information about that boss, and such. And so, and then also there's a map feature, which is like probably pointless, but adds a little bit of cool, like, world building in a way. It's like, oh, okay, turn on the map. And then you go to each boss and you see where they are in the world, which is like, okay, it's like a mini world map that means nothing, but other than seems cool. So I just appreciated a little bit of extra effort there. But then, especially I think, though small, there is something to be said for, okay, I just acquired this weapon from a boss and then they show me shooting the weapon. And then so you're like, oh, okay, that's what that does. That's a thing that, okay. So, you know, so it's a little bit of, I'm sure that's in the manual too, but it's a little bit of usability to see it in action. So you know how to potentially use it, or put 2 and 2 together on stuff. Cause obviously we'll talk about it in takeaways, but that sense of, which weapon is the weakness of the next boss, you know, kind of experimentation that you're gonna do. So yeah, I just appreciated that because it's 16-bit, so we know the art improved, right? Music improved, the presentation, they can do more with it, and so I do feel like they took advantage of that leap, for the most part.
Yeah, for sure. They did, by the way, get to iterate quite a lot on the series. There are over 130 titles in the MegaMan series.
Are you serious? Oh my gosh.
Now, I'm sure some of these are ports and whatevers, but 130 is a lot.
Yeah.
There are a ton of mobile phone games.
There's other genres, I think, too.
But there are quite a lot of games, and I'm just like, it's just pages and pages of the Zero series, the ZX series, the Star Force series for the DS. There's a lot of Mega Man games. Well, so they indeed got to iterate quite a lot.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's I mean, I don't know, maybe it's kind of a Capcom thing now that I think about it, but because they with both Resident Evil and Monster Hunter, I feel like they though not as 130 games, they are pretty good at finding a formula-ish and then, you know, using that formula over and over again. And they, you know, occasionally will, like Resident Evil 4, they'll divert or reboot or whatever you want to say. But, I mean, the Monster Hunter is the other example, right? Like that formula is like beaten to death in a way. And rich, very rich. So you can get away with repeating the formula over and over again in that case. But yeah, Mega Man is when you're at least the core games, I'm sure you know what you're You know what you're getting yourself into.
You
There's going to be a boss
Yeah.
screen. You're going to pick the bosses. You're going to go to the fortress. It's like, got it.
Yeah. And speaking of bosses, there were some mini bosses this time. It seems like one per boss. It seems like I think there were even two. I would say there were two in the. Well, I guess there was one thing that was a little bit more difficult, and it was used twice, so I guess it's technically not a mini boss. In the Launch Octopus, there was a ship that would suck you in, and
yeah.
The first version there were no spikes anywhere nearby, and the second version there were, but
right.
Sort of a mini boss. It was more difficult for sure.
Yeah.
And then the snake, the long snaky thing in Launch Octopus, and there were a bunch of those. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, were there more of that one someplace?
No. I mean, every level had one.
Yeah, and I the only reason the reason that I've had them in my notes was just they, if you try hard to play them well, which like I'll take like for instance the bubble one, which what level was that on? I can't remember. Maybe the mandrill one.
Spark mandrill.
Mandrill, is that what it's called? Is that what those are? Mandrill is it's a baboon, right, or something?
Yeah.
Anyway, yes. So, but that one, like, I guess obviously we don't know what order. They don't know what order you're going to play things in, but if you play them well, they are sort of teaching you some techniques that I think do help you be better at the boss fights. Like with the bubble one, wall climbing, staying wall climbing, and then dashing underneath the bubble. I don't know what else to call that one. It's like it was in a water bubble and they were dropping bubbles on the ground. You remember that one? And then the bubbles would stick to you, kind of like the ice sticks to you. And the
right.
So anyway, long story short, some of these teach you techniques that if you fight the mini bosses well, I think it is a little bit of training for the bigger bosses. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt that it is. But it's something that I don't think 2 did, so I just wanted to mention it.
Yeah, no, for sure. I didn't feel like, that was kind of, I guess, my complaint about the places where I grind was like, I'm not learning anything here.
Yeah.
I'm, the patterns are so simple. I'm getting better at the pattern, but it probably just takes me seeing a couple, to be able, to be able to say, okay, I know how to shoot this thing when I come back, and I know exactly how far to go before it'll come back. And, you just kind of refine that little loop. With the mini bosses, you're actually, potentially learning something that's going to be useful to you later. Although I was able to cheese a fair number of them, so it's like, how much did I learn there?
Yeah,
So,
and that's what I mean, like, especially because we were both playing with the easier mode, probably, right?
there's no easy mode on the SNES Classic.
Oh, there isn't. Okay, so you were playing with, but you had to rewind.
I had rewind, yeah.
But yeah, so I mean, it's a misleading for me with the easier mode because I'm not taking as much damage, but when you're taking, I'll say double the damage that I was taking, like you can't afford to cheese or miss, your jumps or your shots or whatever. So it's like, it is very much that perfection, a little bit Dark Souls in that way, which the mini bosses tend, like, for instance, I guess another way to put what I'm saying is the bosses, and I looked up a couple of the boss sort of ability sets as I was looking at the order. They typically have like 3 to 5 different abilities, but the mini bosses usually have like 2 or 3. And so it's just like kind of a nice ramp up. So anyway, that's a small point.
Yeah, that's true. They're a good punctuation mark in the middle of an area. And
it's a skill test.
Even,
right.
Yeah. Doing a little like, hey, are you actually ready to go take this on? And then, usually after that, I mean, hopefully they come with a reward. Some of them I feel like they do. Just some of the bigger things in general tend to drop. Feels like they drop a little bit more health, and things like that, which is great. And it's sort of like, yeah, you did it. Here you go. Here's a thing. And that's pretty cool too. But yeah,
I will say that once that we talked about this last episode, but once I knew that the dash was on a button. You can also double tap. By the way, for the audience, I swapped to docked Switch mode with a Pro controller, which was literally a game changer for this game. Like Mega Man on the handheld Switch is a bad idea, in my opinion, because there is no D-pad, and then the analogs are not really, it's not made for analogs. So anyway, but so you can double tap on in the direction to do it too. But that dash on the button feels so good. Like if you know, like a boss is up high or something, you dash underneath them or dash away from them. Like it really, if you really get the hang of that, which I think I didn't really, but I improved with it. It does feel pretty good. Yeah.
Oh, it's really important for several bosses. I mean, the octopus in particular, you have to dash to keep away from the suction, and I feel like I did that a lot with the mammoth as well. Try to jump over him and run away the other direction, and against the conveyor belt that he was standing on that might be pulling you towards him, and just generally super useful. The boss that I finally stopped on, which was this spider that follows this. I don't know how it determines what's going to happen. So there's basically these posts, and the spider's going to descend the posts and then follow crossbars, and the crossbars appear. They don't seem like they're random, but they have a bunch of different ones. So I don't know how that's actually done, but it basically comes down, and then it has to, if it reaches a crossbar, it has to go follow it. If there are more than one, it can kind of choose. But so there's some little AI there to figure out, like, how do I get to the player? So you want to be dashing because you want to look at that pattern and dash underneath the spider so you can get, because the spider's armed and only when it hits the ground can you actually shoot it. It's very difficult. And that's why I stopped there. But that was another one where, it's very cool. I mean, I can totally imagine spending a lot of time with that if I had that kind of time. Dark Souls 3 is calling, so I don't have that kind of time.
Yeah, the true Mega Man. Oh, and one note, just talking about the bosses, and I don't know if we have hit all our topics, but one topic that I forgot to mention is a small one, is for the 16-bit transition. I do really think that the visual designs for each of the bosses is very good. Like I really they all are distinct. They all look like the animal that they are said to be. They still look like robots. Like there's a lot of like intricacy with their armor, and then their abilities do a generally good job at reflecting who they are as well. So we played Shadow of the Colossus. We've played other games that are heavy boss, focused games, and Mega Man's like whole thing is like the structure of the game is all about the bosses in a way. And so if there's one thing you want to nail, it's those bosses. And I do think that 16-bit transition for them with this game they did a great job there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I actually really like the I like the bosses a lot. I think they all are distinct, as you say, and like they even have cool state changes in some cases. I'm thinking of the armadillo, which you can shock his armor off, and so now he's no longer the armored armadillo. And that's kind of cool. There's a lot of there's a fair amount of patience with those, I think, as well, that you want to be very thoughtful. It's fast paced, so it's not like you can sit and really plan out, but you do have to be surgical, I should say, really, with what you do, which is very much an arcade, and that's part of the joy of overcoming these things, is like you did the hard thing, right? And that's that's not to be sniffed at, because it is definitely that's why we play these games. We test ourselves against the designer, who's being, cruel and crafty, but we know that it's possible to beat. Well, with some games we know it's possible to beat. I feel like there were games that were released back in the day that were like, is this really beatable by humans?
Battletoads.
Yeah. And they're, I mean, I guess technically, but maybe a very small percentage of the population can actually beat them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is this is definitely that. And that's cool. I mean, that is definitely a thing. I mean, I think that the equivalent on the PC might be, some sort of puzzle game or strategy games where the setup is really kind of a puzzle, where eking out victory in a particular even an RTS, but I was thinking turn based, but might involve really careful thought and well executed plans and things like that. And when you pull those off, it's really great. And this feels kind of the same way, but in the much more Twitch universe. So so I'm not by any means sorry that I played it, but I'm just not able to do these games anymore. They're just even with the rewind, there were a lot of bosses. I mean, I did most of the bosses without rewind within the boss. Like I said, I would just kind of set the save point entering the room, and then just do it again and again. But if I had to get there, from somewhere else, because I died several times with the boss, then I would forget, right? I mean, that's, I think, the thing that really is rough is that you get to the end of the level, you die to the boss, and you have to do the whole level again, and it might have been tough to get there in the first place. I can't even imagine what the end of the game is as far as that goes. So, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, to your point on boss fulfillment, like when I did get a good sense of the patterns and the bosses and executed, like for instance, when I did switch to the Pro controller after I started the second session, and I went back to Penguin, which was, as I said last episode, I had played multiple ones, but decided to focus on the Penguin because that was the supposedly right order, quote unquote. So that was the one I knew the best. I beat him on the first try with that controller, but it was because I had learned enough of the patterns, and it is like a Dark Souls boss where you feel really good if you do it with not in a cheesy way or in a like ham-fisted way of like, okay, I just have one sliver of health because I just didn't care about getting hit or something. But if you do it in an intentional way, then and you beat them, like it is that boss feel. It's like, oh yeah, I did a good job, and I feel fulfilled for taking them down in a effective manner. And there's something to be said for that for boss designs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, how are Ornstein and Smough, by the way?
Oh my gosh. Why did you bring them up? yeah. Those two. Yeah. No, I need Solaire. We've talked about this, but
you do. Yeah. We all need Solaire. Let's then turn to takeaways. I think we're gonna put MegaMan to bed. Cool series. It's not one that we'll probably revisit. I don't think.
No.
I mean, I think in a lot of these series, it's like, we end up playing more of them, or we're curious about more of them, or want to play, different entries in the series. And this one, unfortunately, I don't think really connected that well with either of us, even though we could see, well, first of all, it's not really for us, right? To some degree, we do not have the kind of time in our lives to become good at a game like this, because it really does take a sustained effort, I think, or just a massive amount of time. And my reflexes might just not be there anymore. There were definitely times where I was like, okay, my thumb's getting sore. Which is a whole thing, but yeah, let's turn to takeaways as we do at the end of every series. Kind of a short, weird series this time. 2 games, 2 episodes each. I think that was originally what we were going to do with Castlevania, and then we started Symphony of the Night. We're like, oh, this is not a 2 episode game. Yeah. But this time we did it just by not finishing the game, So I think we got it.
I think we got.
Yeah, I think we understand. Yeah, I think we understand. Yeah. So why don't you give me your first takeaway?
Well, the first takeaway we probably both have, and is obvious, is just I just called it game structure, and dash boss focus. So kind of a combo one there, but just the thing that I remember as a kid loving about when I did try to play these, which I also was bad at them back then, so I think I only finished one, but probably attempted a 3 or so. Um, there, I always did like that structure of that main menu where you're choosing the boss, and as opposed to, not to say that these games are obviously better than a Mario game or something, but I think one of the things that I always would bounce off of Mario games, as we've talked about when we played the two we did, is although I guess 64 gave you more flexibility too, but with the 2D ones at least, is you got to kind of play generally, in an order, so to speak, back then at least, on the NES era. And I loved the idea of, okay, I have a set of bosses here. I can play anyone I want. If I can't get to or beat the one that I'm working on now, I could go try another one, and not accounting for the damage type and weakness model per se, but that flexibility was just neat to me, and the sense of it being very boss centric, like the level is has a almost an identity to it because of the boss that's at the end, right? If it's like a fire guy, then you're like, it's going to be a fire level. And so the culmination up to that point was cool. And then of course, getting the weapon at the end. So that's kind of a combo, 2 at 1, I guess, but the game structure was one for me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the thing I would add to that is that the structure does, because you can try any of them, the structure does lend itself to experimenting, maybe having theories, as we talked about in the first or second episode, like, oh, what, this, I even had it with X, like, oh, okay, well, it sort of makes sense that, this thing might be weak to that one. I might not be right, but you could at least have a theory and try that out and check it and see if it works. And, you also have because you have the password system, which of course would be replaced by a proper save system later. I assume, you have that opportunity to also, try that out. Just, okay, let me go back to that point, and try this thing on this other set of enemies, this other, level, potentially this other boss, if I can get there and try going through that level with this new thing I found. Some of those things work out, some of them don't, but it's cool that that's there. And that's pretty interesting. I found myself doing that with Dark Souls as well. We talked about how I'd get higher level and have more options, just because I had more flexibility in what I could wield. This actually just does it with, I guess there's flexibility in what you wield, the more of them you've done, but this is more of a, try and see, oh, hey, I got this thing, I wonder who it works on. And that's kind of neat. I think that's really important to the series, and probably the biggest thing that people, I would think, would be the kind of biggest thing people remember about it. Yeah.
As an aside, when I was spoiling things for myself on the order and looking at some of the boss profiles, I think with X they brought in, or maybe it was before X, but they didn't have it in 2. I think each boss has its primary weakness, which is obviously the main thing you want to use, but there's almost always a secondary weakness as well. And so maybe, they're starting to bring in a little bit of flexibility of, if you don't quite have the perfect thing, then, we talked about the blades in 2, where the blades actually work on multiple things. So that was an example. But, that flexibility where there's a Venn diagram there someplace that gives the player a little bit of wiggle room, which is, I think, good. Or even during the boss fight, swapping between 2 weapons, back and forth to use on the boss if they both have some effectiveness against it, which is a nice addition. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, and of course they all have to have some weakness to the buster. Like, I don't think the buster purely bounces off of anything. It may do very little, or you may have a short window to use it. I was running around. By the time I finished playing, I was always running around with the button held down to charge it up, which was not something I expected to have happen after Mega Man 2. So that was also a cool sort of addition and gave some, you knew you always had some capability. You might have to dodge a lot before you could use it. So
the fact that every boss, because of the structure, has to be beatable with the X-Buster is a cool concept, right? I mean, it means from a design perspective, they have to account for that. So that's a neat thing, I think.
Yep. That's a good creative constraint for them. All right, give me another takeaway.
I guess the second one we already just talked about accidentally. It's basically attaining abilities in a fresh way, meaning like as opposed to Mario or Metroid. No, Metroid, you get them from canisters and stuff. It's not boss centric. Just the sense that they're related to bosses, right? So you're going to the boss and you know that you're going to get something from the boss, right? And you know that it's going to be significant. So
you're going to see it.
Yeah, and you're going to see
it's going to get used on you first.
Yeah. So that was also always a fresh thing in my opinion, because again, in Metroid, acquisition's different. Castlevania also different. I don't think you got any. Did you get things from bosses? Now I can't remember.
I don't think so. But I don't remember.
Yeah. But it wasn't like this, at least. Like we said, there's a recipe, there's a rhythm. There's a formula here that they're going back, and it sets expectations. And we joked about in X specifically the names of the bosses and the Metal Gear ness of it. But the sense of oh no, I lost the point there. Metal Gear. Nope, lost it. Gone. Sorry, folks.
It's gone.
It was a brilliant point too.
I'm sure it was. Yeah, your brain's just cooking in that shed of yours.
Literally.
All right, then. Yeah, I guess the other one that I would say is I do really admire the variety of environments, especially in MegaMan X.
Yeah.
That's not separate and unique to this game by any means, but it does. As I mentioned, I think last time, it feels like it ties in with the place, right? It makes sense that each of these bosses sort of has their own domain that that they've been given to lord over, which is I think really pretty cool. And part of the variety too is that that may tie into the actual battle as well with the boss in particular. So the octopus has a definite different feel than the penguin does, who of course slides back and forth super fast because it's icy, and then the storm eagle sort of does, and this was good design because it's an eagle. It does like these dive attacks on you off the screen because it has no limits. There's no walls, right? You're on the ship up in the air, and so it sort of like dives out from off the screen entirely, and just kind of diagonally at you, and you have to be ready to jump away to evade those. Those are a few that stood out to me of like, oh yeah, that really fits this particular environment. And I guess the flame mammoth is in sort of a foundry, right? So there's sort of hot metal all around, I guess, and things like that. So I don't know. It just I think the variety of the enemies, the designs that are very distinct. I mean, this was also true in the original. I think the levels themselves are a little less distinct in the first one. It's much more sort of techno future thing, but in general, I think that variety is a real selling point for me. And it makes you. I can imagine opening up the manual on your way home from the store and just being like, oh man, what does that one do? Or whatever. And what kind of weapon am I going to get from that one is all pretty cool. So, and I was still seeing that into the end, fortress, right? With the, that spider boss was really cool. I mean, way too difficult for me, but still neat. So it was cool to see. So, yeah.
I remembered my sub point, kind of related to this in that the reason I brought up Metal Gear is that their commitment to their formula being that the game revolves around bosses and boss identity the way Metal Gear does, in a way, right? Like Psycho Mantis, the level design and the situation and the boss and the way you fight them, and and even obviously the meta stuff that happens in Psycho Mantis fight or whatever, or Revolver Ocelot, right? It's like it's all sort of like cohesively designed and thought through, and to your point on the levels preceding the bosses in Mega Man, same thing. It's like, okay, you're in water, you're going to fight an octopus, it's like, and maybe even learn some things along the way. So that commitment, which again, we have the modern day, whether it's Dark Souls or Shadow of the Colossus or any of these sort of boss focused games where the bosses really are like stars of the show. Mega Man's in there someplace.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, everything I think looks back to that. And I wonder if it even started to bleed into other franchises where the bosses weren't as big a thing before. I don't know if that's true. I mean, there are definitely bosses in, the Marios or what have you, but they don't have this kind of variety typically, or in the early games. In 3D, once they moved to 3D, there's a lot more variety, I think, in the Mario series, for example. But and Zelda always had it, I guess. So I guess it depends on the game, how much that gets over to there. But yeah, for sure. All right. Do you have anything else, sir?
The last one I have here is a small one we talked a little bit about, only in contrast to the other games. It's contemporaries of the time, is really character feel. And that's one thing as playing it as a youngster that I remember vaguely not knowing how to talk about it then, but just the sense of the character feeling different than the other side scrollers of the time, right? When it comes to the physics, the collision, the way his floatiness, his lack of floatiness, like the way, you're a side scroller where you can shoot a gun, and so a laser, whatever. And so the character feel just being distinct, and for them to chart their own course there and not feel like they have to copy the other side scrollers out there, or character or mascot games, so to speak. We never talked about, when we talked about the mascot games, come to think of it, through our platformers that we played, Mega Man never came up, but Mega Man is really Capcom's mascot, character.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would just piggyback on that and also go to the look of the thing, because it is very bright, colorful. We talked with Mega Man X specifically about it being more heroic looking, more of an expression of what I think was already there in the original Mega Man games. Just a little bit, they were able to do a little bit more with it. I think they were able to fully attain it. He's definitely a lot squatter, in that original game. Not that hurts it. But I think that they get all the way there with the X game to be, to be more what they were aiming for. And it really does feel like, you could squint and see the manga in the first one, but you can actually see the manga, in the anime or whatever in the second series of the X games. And I think that's a real strong, selling point, and now that we're in an age where there's always always this chasing of photorealism and things like that, I'm glad to see. I'm not always. That's way too broad a brush, but there was often, certainly at certain budget levels, right, of like, hey, well, it's got to be photorealistic or whatever, having something that is decidedly not, and even, it has its own look that is different from, trippy Mario with his mushrooms or what have you. And I appreciate that, and I thought that really stood out in this game in particular, and in the bosses, which we already talked about. So a lot of character in the art, which the SNES allows. So
yep.
All right. Well, in that case, I think we can put a pin in Mega Man. I don't know, what is he, a 9-pin? Is he like serial port? I don't know what kind of pins you put in Mega Man.
What's his port? Yeah, what's his robot port?
What kind of ports does he
plug
have?
him in?
Yeah. Is it USB? Ugh,
It does, now that we're finished though, it does really make me want to play. Is it 9, which was the sort of spiritual retro sequel reboot, whatever, like it,
I don't know.
2016. So what they did, which I think I mentioned it last episode.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, they picked right up with 7 or whatever.
Yeah, and I think I was wrong on that. I think actually 7 and 8 were still back in the old days, but I don't know. I looked it up, and I think at least 9 was like 2017 16 or something, or 20, yeah, something around there. So point being is that they, what's
9 was 2008, 10 was 2010.
Oh, okay. So I was way off, but
so 8 was 96 though. So 8 to 9 was 12 years.
Yeah. So, but I think 9 is still done in the style of the 8-bit, as far as I could see. But I want to look it up. And point being, what is it like for them to make a modern-ish version of a 8 or 16-bit game? Which I always love. That's similar to what was the Sonic one they did that was Sonic Mania, that was so well received, right? Of like a modern version of Sonic that was really good, and felt like the original, but your memory of the original, not actually the original, and I kind of want to see what kind of usability changes they make and modernization they make to a game that is pretty hardcore, and maybe they have ways that they've brought it into whatever the 2000s, mid 2000s that make it, more interesting. So you need to see.
Yep. Well, they definitely have some levels that look like the original. So yeah, they definitely are going. Oh yeah, I'm seeing some other.
I feel like
they went that way for
sure.
Sure.
I looked at some of the screenshots, and MegaMan himself looks like he did in 2. Yeah.
Yep. I agree with that.
Pretty cool.
That is a bold choice for sure. I guess they brought him out of retirement, where that village. I don't know. Is it a different Mega Man? So many lore questions, Tim.
Yeah, I know.
Do you want to hit some emails, or are you cooked?
I am pretty cooked.
Okay,
we can maybe do one.
Okay,
I'm not short on time. I'm just cooked. I could not even tell you how hot it is in here right now. it's
quite warm. Yeah.
I am sweating. So, but we can maybe sneak one in. You want me to?
All right, sneak one in. Go ahead and read the first one. Yeah, we'll catch up with the other ones later.
Okay, all right. Subject: Dark Souls, Mega Man, and accessibility. Okay, here we go. From Sam Thomas. Hi, Brett and Tim. I'm in the progress of making a hard turn into web accessibility in my career. So I've been thinking about accessibility in games a lot for the past 18 months. I've even tried to play The Last of Us 2 with the screen off and no prior experience with the game. It didn't go well, he says. One insight I've had is that making a game accessible for a person doesn't have to mean making the game beatable by the person. I had quite a lot of fun with Mega Man 2 as a child, even though I couldn't beat it. That means it was accessible. That means it was accessible to me. I would argue that there's great fun to be had with the Dark Souls series as well, even if a person can't quite complete the game. I agree with that. One question I have for both of you is if you think every game should meet certain accessibility requirements, such as those found in The Last of Us 2 or Ratchet and Clank, do you think games should do that? And should we go further and say all games should be playable by someone who is blind, deaf, mobility impaired, etc.? The answer on the web is 100% yes, but games might be different. A key design principle is to have accessibility in mind from the ground up instead of bolting it on later, but that could make it impossible to make the types of experiences that certain other players enjoy. I don't know where I fall on this question, but I do know the key to accessibility is to support lots of customization options so that players can tune it to their capabilities. I'll close by sharing that I attended a gaming and accessibility talk at CSUN this year and was struck by 2 attendees who are blind when they shared how much they longed to be able to play more games. Interestingly, they said the games that are playable for them are not challenging enough. P.S. Some really fun media related to Mega Man 2. The SS...
Some links and stuff there, yeah.
Okay, yeah, so there's some links on. SSB Mega Man trailer has some cool callbacks. Don't know what SSB is.
Super Smash Brothers.
Oh, okay. Oh, nice. Yeah, I bet. Probably that's probably... And if you like the Mega Man 2 soundtrack, check out this live concert of Bit Brigade playing the music while someone speedruns the game. That's amazing. Cool. Thanks, Sam.
Yeah, I mean, as far as accessibility goes, I mean, I think I mean, I would like for different ability not to be a barrier to playing my own games personally, right? So I don't know if I would say, any particular game is the bar, like The Last of Us 2 or Ratchet and Clank. I think they do fantastic jobs. It's not to say that. It's just hard to say like every game should have these things, because there may be things we don't know yet, we haven't figured out, because we tend to be as developers at least able in those ways, right? Because there haven't historically been a lot of games that are available, say, to the blind, as you point out in your letter. That means most people who go into developing games as a career tend to be able to see, right? So there's kind of a like, we're not.
Good point.
I almost said we're the blind leading the blind, but of course it's exactly not that, which is the problem. So yeah, we have kind of it's something that we need to find a way to incorporate into how we work, and I assume there are, people who can consult on that sort of thing, but it's not something, as an engineer, I'm usually given, here, go do this, and not a lot of the, here, figure out how to do this on something like accessibility, because other people are doing research into those areas, and I'm just kind of given the results. But I do know that those games are particularly great examples of having lots of things that you can do to make it possible to play the game.
Yeah,
sir.
I'm also not an expert in this, but we're definitely still learning, all of us, and trying to be better here. So it is a constant topic, day to day. The one thing, whenever this comes up, as far as like the debate part of it, and obviously we always talk about Dark Souls in this regard, and Celeste being another good example of a challenging game that has a lot of options to allow for differently able people to play it, etc. The thing that I feel like often, and this is a personal perspective, I'm not speaking in a definitive manner, but the thing that sort of bums me out when people kind of take a hard line on this. Anyway, to answer Sam's question, not definitively, but simply from my own perspective, I feel like, yes, the answer is every game should be trying to do some accessibility. Maybe there are limits depending on the genre, but I think every game should start with the goal of broadening that out so more people can play, as a sort of high level goal. And then you see, like every goal, you see what you can achieve, but really prioritize it and make it like a first class citizen for the game. But the thing that bums me out is like, and I haven't played Celeste yet, but I've read about it, listened to people talk about Celeste, and it seems like a good example of the options that game developers give gamers to allow for differently abled people to play it are optional. They're options. And so for the people who want that harder, or whatever, want it to be more difficult, or you can do that. The options go both ways. It's like, it's your own discipline on whether you turn them on or not and make the game easier for yourself or not. That's your choice. So it's like, it's frustrating when it's sort of like only a one-way argument, because it really does go both ways, and it's really up to the player. And games are about agency, so why not embrace that in all fashions? So anyway, maybe a bit more of a soapbox than I intended, but
no, I mean, I think you're right. There tends to be, and this is a weird. Like, I feel like this is an internet era. I mean, it was probably true before, but it seems like it's intensified by the internet to make this a gatekeepy thing. Like, oh, you didn't really play the game, and it's like, no, you really played the game. You played the game. You actually played that's like, the fact that you turned it and made it easier for yourself, or whatever other option you turned on, you played the game. Like, I'm never going to be precious about that. Like, I've seen people defend, this game could only be this, if because of the way it is. And I'm like, that's probably not true. Like, people get a lot of different things out of different games, and maybe it wouldn't be what you got out of it, but it might be something else. Like, and I don't, I don't know that that I feel that way about those things. I've definitely had times where it's like, oh, it's so great just to turn this down in difficulty and just breeze through some part of a game. Nothing comes immediately to mind, but I know I've done that in the past and been like, oh wow, I feel so much better. And I'm playing. I'm literally playing. That's what I'm doing. And it's like, I don't know why anybody would say that's not what that is. But we seem to say that on the internet because I don't know. Because we're tribal, I guess, because we're naturally tribal.
And I think it's ego too. I mean, it's for people to say that you didn't do it the right way or the hardest way or whatever. We talked, it makes me think of a couple things from our past on the podcast. One, we didn't talk about it in terms of accessibility per se, I don't think, but remember the Dark Forces settings that Darren and everyone put in there. One of them was just like whatever, invulnerability or something, right?
Right.
I think you just turn it on, literally. It's like not even a cheat code. Yep. It was in the menu. And at the time you think, that's crazy. It's like they put God mode into the settings, which, for id games and stuff, you could do that maybe through console or something, but kind of bold to put it in there. But that's early accessibility features, right? That they're kind of not realizing it. And then the other thought as you were talking that I kind of realized about Dark Souls is that in a completely Dark Soulsian way / lore-y kind of like way, Solaire is an accessibility feature. Because
they make everything in the game. Everything's in the game.
yeah, which is kind of neat. I don't know if I assume people talk about him that way. It's not like this is revelation, but it didn't dawn on me until just now. Of like, I'm stuck on these bosses. And I probably, like, I'm chipping away. I probably will beat them if I really focus, but I can just go get Solaire if I want to, and I'm just going to have him help. A lot of help.
It's still going to be hard. That is not an easy fight.
No, I know, but I mean, it's a big. Yeah, that's basically a slider, right? In a way,
for sure. Oh yeah, I mean, I'm always happy. I mean, I think in both 2 and 3, I can't remember now in 3, but definitely in 2, there were a number of bosses where you could summon 1 or 2 helpers.
Wow.
And I was always like, you know what? I'm just going to summon both of them. And that meant a lot of bosses were one-shots for me, and I mean, I think part of that is I'm getting better at the series too, because there have been things that I don't have help for that are one-shot. And I had at least one-shot in the original as well. So it's not just that, but I at no point would I say I didn't play the game because I used these accessibility features, for sure, and I don't know. I just hope we get away from something like I forget his name, but the Ninja Gaiden guy, who was like, if you want to be a dog, we put in easy level, we put in Ninja Dog, difficulty level. Or
was it Itagaki?
Yeah, I think that's his name, right? With the glasses and
the cowboy hat.
Too cool for school guy. I'm glad we're moving away from that and being okay with that. I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine sitting down to play a board game with your kids when they're young and trying to get them into board games and telling them, no, we can't possibly play XYZ way because that's not allowed. No, you're not really playing the game if you do that.
Right.
You can't have 2 Candyland cards. No, you just play that way. Okay, we'll play that way.
Yeah.
The point is play, not some arbitrary, Anyway, now I'm on a soapbox. Thanks for extending a hand and saying, here, join me on this soapbox.
That is a funny board game reference though, because it's sort of like house rules were the original accessibility feature.
Yep. That's like, to some degree, that's true. Yeah. And just ways to make the game better for the players. And that's the point. Right. So, and I think that's fine. So, all right. Well, thank you for that email, Sam, to devgameclub@gmail.com. We do have others and we will get to them. But poor Tim is cooking. I can smell.
You have no idea. I have not been. I
flesh.
Might faint anytime. So
Okay. Well, let's get through it quickly then. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
He also twitches occasionally at twitch.tv/Tim Longo Jr., where he's been playing Dark Souls, but he is off a little bit. Next week, he is out the week that this comes out. I don't know about the week after. We shall see. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast Aaron Evers, and our logo, of course, as well as our merchandise store, check the Twitter feed, is by Mark Garcia of Dog Game Club Fan. Have fun making your way to Sigma's Fortress this week, and good night.
Good night.
You made it.
Yeah.
You're still standing.
I ran out of water, so that was part of it. I was like,
oh, that's pretty rough.
Yeah.
Go turn on your cooler.